7 after, we ready to get started?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Introductions. Is there anyone new to the working group who's here today that'd like to say hi? I'm gonna take that as a no. Moving on, release planning and updates. I know Pack just shipped a patch release. Do you want to give an update, Javier?
We shipped a patch release. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we did ship a patch release. What was it? Yesterday. And it had to do with a bug that we found in relation to mounting volumes for the creator flow. We have found another bug in relation to, kind of the new untrusted / creator feature. We're still in discussions as to whether or not that warrants a patch. For those discussions of, you can go to Slack and there is a PR for that up already. We're just, again, kind of in those discussions right now.
Thanks, Javier. All right. Time for everyone's favorite outstanding RFCs. We'll try to do this quick because we have a couple people want to talk about in depth. Let me share the screen here. Starting at the bottom, app image extensions, OS packages, if I remember correctly, this is sort of waiting on root build packs to fall out. So we're gonna skip over this for now. Does that sound right to everybody?
Yep.
Cool. Image exposes metadata for all layers that participated in an image build.
I think I asked if we can move this to draft while he works through it. But
Okay, so we're just waiting for response from Paul here. Okay. Build plan merging. I think this is in FCP with a disposition to close, if I remember correctly.
yeah, I think there were some good ideas in here with, at least with some of the table merging stuff that we're talking about, but
I just put a bunch of like grammar corrections and spelling, things like that.
Cool. Okay, so it's gonna close today.
Yeah, I haven't heard anyone actually make a strong argument for keeping it open. Does anybody want final chance to say it before I just close it out?
no, I think it's fine to close and we can always reopen another RFC based on it.
Sounds great.
Okay, we're gonna skip over the draft here. Publish a build pack with pack.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
That's on the list for deeper discussion. Root build packs.
We'll skip that today. We have a discussion planned, like a breakout tomorrow, I think.
Sounds good. Stack metadata.
I think you requested changes on this, Emily, specifically.
Looks like
Or
Ben
Ben.
has a request for changes here.
Yeah, I think we're still on the 25-day, 21-day around something.
Something. Seems like there are a couple unresolved questions here from Ben.
Yeah, that's it. Just waiting on responses from Kesha.
Sounds good. Okay. This one is in FCP. Our API versions RFC. Let's see when we said we were going to close this.
I think today.
Looks like today's the day. We can merge that after this meeting.
I'll take care of it.
I think I saw a pack image pull policy on the list for deep dives later. We can skip over that. Offline build packages, RFC. I know I had some questions here that I don't think have been answered yet. Maybe we can, is Dan on the call today? Maybe someone can nudge him later.
I'll send him a message later.
Okay, cool. Increase build plan flexibility.
A final thing was opened against it 19 hours ago. I haven't had a chance to address it, but I will today. We can move on.
Okay. Process specific env and profile D. I'm assuming this is also something we can merge today because we're in FCP here. Yep. Looking
I'll take that one as
good.
well.
I put lifecycle arguments on the list for discussion. Read write platform volume mount. I believe after our last conversation, Ben changed this to be open to mounting in other parts of the container, not just an unsafe directory in platform. And
That sounds correct to me.
seems
I
like
have
discussion
not-
is still
yeah,
active here.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to talk about this today if there's time too.
Do you want to throw it on the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay. That is the review. So the first discussion on our list is publish a build pack with pack. Do you wanna
Yeah, we
take it away, Joe?
I think we're really close here. I moved the headless and anything related to headless out of the RFC, and I think we're going to try and address that separately. There's two concluding things. One is the desire to use GitHub identity as a source of for ownership. Getting weird error messages.
Yeah, I don't think we heard you.
Yeah, we couldn't hear you.
Yeah.
I was waiting to see if someone else.
And now he's gone. We'll give him one more minute and we'll kick it to the end.
He's probably just trying to rejoin, I bet.
Yeah.
Don't
All right, let's move it to the
understand,
end of the list and go on.
He's on the phone.
He's on the phone
now.
now. He's here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 1 second.
Man, Emily's ruthless.
1 minute. That was the shortest minute I've ever seen.
I
Yeah.
wasn't gonna kick it off the agenda. I was just gonna skip the part where we all sat here silently.
All right. Yeah. So, what was I saying? Yeah, there's two conflicting concerns here. One is the desire to use GitHub identity as a source of truth for ownership of a build pack, and the other is, I think, the one that Stephen brought up, which was not wanting to create anything on GitHub, including an issue on behalf of a user, without actually opening a browser. So those two things, like wanting to have both of those, is basically not possible to have headless. So we have to compromise on one of them to get somewhere. But I don't think, just after putting some thoughts into it, I don't think whatever we end up doing there will compromise or change what's the non-headless route. So that's why I think I'm comfortable going forward with an RFC that just doesn't have anything about it in there. It does mean that for the time being, there's no solution for headless. So I think that's really the thing we just need to confirm.
Do you have thoughts on you don't consistently use the same repo name throughout the RFC?
Yeah, I think I just fixed that, or some of them.
Do you mind the index change?
No, I think it probably should be indexed.
And the other one for me was probably I imagine most people where we can publicly assume is probably going to use Docker Hub for hosting generic.
Yeah, I made that
a good assumption.
I think,
okay.
like I called the argument, what Terrence is talking about is for the argument for a published build pack was called URL, but I think that's not accurate. It could be a URL in the Docker / format, like in the build pack URI RFC, but it will most likely be a tag with no prefix like host prefix or anything. So I think we should support, anything in that format, and can.
Yeah, I guess my proposal is like just match what Docker does for pushing to registry kind of thing.
Yeah, in it, but also with the addition of Docker / I think, right? Or well, no, that might not even be necessary because we're not we're not allowing arbitrary HTTP URLs or anything like that. So yeah,
right.
Yeah,
fine.
we could infer that basically.
Mm-hmm.
But what about like the other, like the CNB links. I forgot what.
The
That's not-
CMB files or
Yeah,
any
like
sort
the
of other
other
file
RFC,
format.
the other
Yeah, we're
RFC
saying,
about,
so
like, URNs.
as part of the registry specification, we are saying that the build package has to exist in a Docker registry. So the build pack registry would not be compatible with like .cmd files or build packages in formats other than an OCI image. That doesn't mean it might not in the future, but as it's spec now, that's not the case.
If we want to leave that open, maybe we should not make that assumption for the Docker thing.
I'd like to see it restricted to start with. Give us the smallest possible anticipated surface area, and then loosen that if we find that there is demand for it.
Yeah, I think Terrence is saying, though, not make the assumption about the argument. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not the scoping. I think we want to leave that open, then it probably makes sense to not go with my suggestion. But
I think we would still default to that. Although it does change. Well, okay, so actually that might come tie into the next thing that I wanted to bring up. I prototyped what's in the RFC in pack and was just playing around with it. And one of the things that kind of came across to me as like awkward is the flow between package build pack and publish build pack, where like I create a new build pack, I do what I need to do, I test it, I'm playing around with it, awesome. Now I want to publish it. I have to create a package toml, run package build pack, and then run publish build pack with the thing that I just pushed, where like really what I want to do is just from that repo run publish build pack. And so I was just starting to wonder if we needed to account for that in the RFC, if it would change anything. Maybe it doesn't. But one of the implications I was just thinking of is the same problem that we had with build pack paths in like with the -b flag in pack build, that basically led to the build pack URI RFC. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely brought up the concern about, even just sharing some of the terminology between the different steps that you'd be running. And it sounds like, even furthermore, if we consider the UX of the publishing of a build pack, having to run multiple commands to really just achieve one thing, like that you could foresee as a, in some sort of shortcut fashion would be nice. But I mean, I don't know if that's really what we want to focus in on first versus just providing all the separate commands, because we know that we need what we are proposing in this RFC, right? Like people are going to have their build packs in a Docker image somewhere and they just want to put them onto a registry. So I think that command in itself is necessary.
I think, are they though? I don't think they're going to have their build packs in a Docker image unless they are a platform implementer or are trying to publish a build pack. Like, I just don't think they're going to go there naturally, right? So like, I think what I'm thinking is that publish build pack should run package build pack on a single build pack without needing a package toml. And it should be able to do that. Like just from the build pack directory, you should be able to point to a build pack toml file, run publish build pack, and up it goes.
So are you saying, it seems like now there's 3 different points, right? Like there's the packaging up an individual build pack, right? And then pushing it somewhere to a registry, and then adding that to our build pack registry, right? So those 3 operations you're saying should really just be one operation. I agree with that, completely. I think it would change the RFC significantly, that the conversation would maybe start over again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like, I think Javier's point too is like, you probably also still want the separate commands, like at least the primitives there to be able to do it. And like, maybe we just change the name of the command that's being RFC'd in, so we can reserve space for publish buildpack, whatever that we want to call the nice thing, to something else, as to not like block the RFC that exists today.
Yeah, no, I thought about the same thing, and I was thinking that what is proposed as publish build pack in the RFC is probably more like release build pack or register build pack. Yeah. So yeah, that did come across my mind. I think that's probably the best thing to do. So yeah, I'll propose changing the name to register or release. And then we can reserve publish build pack for the more complex behavior.
Yeah, you probably could even assume like pushing a Docker hub or something. For pushing them.
Yeah, well, I mean, or whatever's like if you have gcr.io or whatever configured in something. Yeah.
If we're going with this, the kind of other question I had was around issue creation on the, like after you create the issue, when we're validate, like there's no validation, I guess, on the service side of like the data. But if we like if we run into any issues, like how do we provide feedback back to the end user? And like, cause they can edit that issue, right? So like in theory, they could like muck it up.
Yep. Yeah, we probably should validate. I was kind of thinking that we wouldn't, because you have to do the validation on the client side anyways, but it's easy enough. We should probably do that. I think we should reply with a comment and probably aggressively close the issues, because like the follow-up step for anyone is just to create a new issue, because if you run the command again, you're getting a new issue. So I think the way we communicate back is by putting a reply, having the bot put a reply on the GitHub issue and immediately closing it.
I didn't comment on this on the RFC, but I was thinking about it the other day. You have a note about basically not having anything else open with regards to issues or PRs. And I wonder if we should just use labels or something. So like if potentially there is like a thing that we do want, like people, including ourselves, can open issues or something and have that route. Whereas like anything that's automated through the bot, like goes under a very specific label.
That makes sense.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's easy enough to add too, because you can do that from the GitHub. What do they call it? The query parameters on the URL for a new issue. You can define a label, so you can just do that when it opens up the browser. All right, so that all makes sense. Those sound like just changes that need to be made, and I'll make those. And then I'm going to try and call for a vote once I make those changes, because I think we're pretty close to having this done.
Do we decide on the first thing, which was if we wanted to shortcut the URL, or if we wanted to leave that open? Sound like maybe we want to leave it open based off comments. It's easy enough to shortcut it after we're fact.
I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Given the discussion, I don't have a good. I don't have a good idea of what we think the tighter setup that can be loosened in the future is. Right. Like I think that goal of we should do what it takes today to make sure that it is unambiguously a Docker image URL, and then give us the flexibility to loosen that in some way, but I'm not sure if that means locking down the argument or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my suggestion, I don't know if you saw it, Ben, was like if everything is a Docker like registry type like URI kind of thing, like most people are probably going to publish through Docker Hub. So like the Docker client, most people who like it's the only one we could probably assume reasonably, and so like it's kind of annoying to have to type like Docker : / Docker Hub, blah, 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 like for every kind of thing that we're forcing all of our users. And so, you know, Docker conveniently allows you to basically shorthand that to namespace / repo : label.
Does it close down, though, the possibility of us adding URLs and file system paths in the future?
I don't know if it specifically does. I haven't thought through it because it just came up in the conversation just now. But I think it leads back to even like that URI discussion that or RFC that Javier had.
I was about to
do
suggest
we need to go down that path again? It's just like, if we do, like, maybe it's safe to just not kind of lock it down for now, and we can always add that in after.
I feel like how I'm imagining the other cases working, you would still always need a Docker registry address, right? Because you're either, you know, doing a couple steps and then putting it in a registry and then putting it in a Docker registry and then putting it in our registry, or you're just putting something that's already in a Docker registry in our registry. But I think we still want it to move to a Docker registry anyways, right? So wouldn't you just need a Docker registry argument, and then later you could add something that's like a path to a package toml, or even more magic, a path to a build pack on the file system, or a URL or something. But I think you still need a place for it to live.
That's the one. Once you introduce the path to a build pack on the file system, that's where you run into the problems of pack build, the -b argument. But that we would only be talking about in the context of the to be described published build pack. For the one that will be renamed in this RFC, it will not accept the path to a build pack as an argument ever. It'll only release an already packaged build pack with the published flag. I don't know what to call it. Something on a registry or
right. And so one of the things I want to push back on, Emily, I don't think that we have like a very strict belief that the canonical representation of all these things will be an image in a registry or layers in a registry. You could imagine a CNB hosted as a GitHub asset, and the build pack registry could point to that particular tarball asset, right? It will never live in a registry. The pack command or the pack CLI or whatever may download it and synthesize something locally within its build context, but it doesn't necessarily have to be canonically an image.
I sort of thought one of the goals of the build package extension was to make that the canonical representation. And like everything else is a convenience, and we can make it easy to get from your convenience to there. But there is a canonical representation, I think, does keep things simple at the end, especially when we're talking about authentication, when you're trying to pull these things down. Like when everything's a Docker, it's easier.
Yeah, the tricky part with it being anything other than Docker is that pulling the config blob to validate what the build package is. Like if we're pointing at an arbitrary tarball, I think, well, I mean,
all that information must be in there, right? It went into the image.
It's possible.
Right, but
it's always possible, but it's not as
thing.
performant. If you want to do things like list information about the things in the registry, it's nice to be able to just the config.
You're not going to get an argument from me that the images in a registry should be the way everybody does it. But if there is an existence of a CNB, if a builder can point to a CNB URL as a GitHub asset, then introducing a restriction that entry into the registry requires something other than use by pack or use by kpack, I think is a little bit dicey. I'm not sure we should support it initially, right? Like we should definitely do it on demand, but I don't think there's anything inherent in the build pack registry that demands a Docker registry representation.
I thought the RFC and spec did specifically call out that it had to be an OCI registry.
The digest reference specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's room for what Ben is saying. Like
right, in a world that's not here yet, though, right? Like in some potential, maybe like other RFC, and I don't know if maybe we're thinking too far out. That
right, and so I don't want to plan it. I don't want to say that's a thing, but I also don't want us to pick a syntax that's going to put us in the pack build territory again, where we said, oh, it's always going to be something that doesn't need to be qualified, and now we're having to do some sort of backwards incompatible or heuristic changes to it.
Yeah, that was mostly the question I was trying to get resolved as part of this RFC. Is like, we're not supporting that future world, maybe ever. Maybe we are, but we don't want to kind of
But I think, yeah, no, I think
corner.
I get it, and I think we're fine, because we're saying that the only like naked, like it will support the URIs as defined in the Buildpack URI RFC. Like that, I'm certain of. The only caveat is when it's naked, we would treat it as a Docker tag.
Is that the plan for like pack build as well, or no?
No. For pack build,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
well, I mean, it's a little bit different, right? Like,
Yeah, it is a different thing. I was just wondering how consistent it was.
I mean, that matters, but yeah.
Yeah, I
guess
don't think there's a good answer here. And Joe, I trust that you have thought about it way more than me. If you're comfortable, I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with the behavior being different on the naked path, in part because this will be a lower level command than the published build pack, which might have, different spec.
Sounds great.
All right, cool. Anything else on this, or should we move on to the next one?
No, those are all the things I had. I don't know if anyone else had.
Okay.
Cool.
Moving on to the launcher RFC. We talked about this last week, allowing the launcher to accept arguments that then get appended to the arguments of a given process type. Since we all talked about it, I made some rather large changes to this RFC that so instead of trying to use a lookup to determine the difference between a command and an argument, by default, everything is assumed to be an argument, and it is an argument to a process type that has to be set using the CMB process type and environment variable, rather than something that can be specified on the command line. And if you wish to override the entire command, you have to set CMB process type equals override. And then the arguments will be treated as a whole custom defined process by the user, rather than as arguments to append to a process type. The other change here is one of the sticking points we were running into before is how we're going to add arguments to a bash process, because the way we were evaluating bash processes before, if we put them in the arguments array, we wouldn't use them in an intuitive way, and just adding them to the command string introduced a lot of problems with shell parsing and tokenization. So I spent some time playing around with the launcher and created some somewhat complicated if you read it bash behavior, but it does do all the things correctly if you have arguments in a bash process. So this is proposing both this change to how we would invoke direct false processes in the case where they have arguments, and some of the change to the platform usage of the launcher. And I'd love for people to take a look at it or ask any questions here if they have them.
I just want to say that I really like how simple the, I guess, introduction is of saying everything is an argument to a process type. I think that works really, really well. It's easy to explain and express. The only concern, and it's not really that, it's probably just nitpicking at names, is I'm not sure about the name override as having this, like a reserved process type. I feel like maybe they could be a better choice there, but I could add that to the RFC.
Yeah, suggestions welcome there. I'm not tied to, particularly wed to override. Part of me thought
Another environment variable.
Part of me thought leaving it unset in some ways was the most intuitive. After thinking about it, that has always meant web, and I think even though it's intuitive, it's not worth changing that on our users.
Agreed, but another environment variable, right? CNB process type override or something like that. That's just set or unset. It doesn't actually have a value to it.
Do you want to add that as a comment, that suggestion? I kind of like the keyword better than a separate one, but I'm open to both. It's not that particular detail isn't what is important about
Yeah.
this change to me.
I'll let
That's not the
Javier
hill
make
you're
some
dying on.
suggestions there.
How do we feel about the Docker run image process type, being unsupported in this new world?
One interesting thing about that is when I was writing this, I learned that it was never spec'd or documented anywhere. So I'm not sure that many people use it. And because we were struggling to fit all of the different information we needed into the fields we have at our disposal, having two different ways to set the process type, like the environment variable and the command line, felt unnecessary to me. I'm okay with there just being one because they're both fairly easy to set. In most cases, you'd be writing a container. Does anyone else feel struggling with the command line usage of that is particularly convenient?
I used it pretty extensively in demos and things like that, and I think that it is definitely a regression from how it used to be. But I think the advantages of getting arguments, it totally outweighs any inconvenience to losing it, especially since it was never spec'd.
Right. And
Yeah,
to me,
it's-
coming into this project, it was actually confusing that I could do that. I wasn't expecting that to be a feature, to be honest, that I could specify a process type as something that actually runs.
Yeah, same. It's used in a lot of like blog posts and stuff like that now. But I think people definitely found it unexpected, even though I used it all the time. And I think people that eventually learned it would use it a lot. They didn't expect it to work. And then when you start throwing in there's this launcher thing, and it's actually wrapping your command. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like it's used a lot, probably in Heroku land, like unrelated to CMB, but like Heroku run process type is a pretty common paradigm, I think.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how often we like bash into something, right? Now we'll have to be a lot more explicit to do that.
I think
Oh, yeah,
Heroku run process type could still Docker run while setting the environment variable, right? In some ways, it's still open for a platform to create the usage it wants on top of that. It's just what the naked usage of the container looks like.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the platforms that can do whatever, that'll be hidden. The bash example, actually, that question I've gotten a ton. Can I, like, it seems kind of naive to us, but a lot of people will ask, oh, can I inspect that image? And when you can tell them Docker run -it, yada, yada, bash, that's a big win for a lot of people.
Can you not bash in this new proposal? Is that?
You still can, you just need to set the
Yeah.
process type to override before you bashed. Which in some ways it makes sense to me, because if you had a container with an entry point, you wouldn't be able to Docker run bash it without disabling that. And I've been thinking about CMB process type as sort of analogous to the entry point in this case.
People Docker run bash all the time on images though, right? Like that's a pretty common.
It is, but if it has an
Not
entry
an
point,
app
it won't
image.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not an app image, even in other app images, there's been cases where the entry point is set in a very specific way where you're not able to do that, right? Because at that point, it then becomes that you're passing arguments to that entry point.
Yeah, I think a lot of people today bash in and they don't realize that they've also gotten all the like launcher, environment variables and stuff. And so like as soon as we do make this change, then having the CMB process type of override, it makes it more explicit, but it does mean that like what they might have been able to do in bash before, they won't be able to do without going through the launcher explicitly to get there again.
Yeah. And what they're going to do is set in, like, they're going to -- entry point and just bypass the whole thing. That seems like a problem.
That does seem like a trap people could fall into. If they set the process type to override and then bash, the launcher is still bootstrapping that for you, so you would get the environment and all of that stuff and the profile scripts. It's just sort of the education around don't use the entry point, use this other thing that seems like the potentially dangerous part here.
Yeah, I guess the base pitfall is like you have to learn about CMV process type override.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think like people might naturally try the bash thing in the existing CMV thing, and then the fact that it worked is probably a pretty nice. Like I remember like when people would Heroku run bash and realize that's a thing that lets them get access to the dyno or whatever and do whatever in it. Was a pretty powerful moment. So I have some slight, I guess, sadness if that magically went away as part of this change.
Yeah, I feel like there's just a limited set of trade-offs, right? You can't magically append arguments and magically replace the command without doing something like the lookup that I think people thought was too brittle or complicated to really move forward with.
Yeah, so if we think about like what the default experience should be, right? Like which one do we really think that one is? Is it the one where you treat your app image container as something that you could just execute any command on, or as being the default, or is it that you execute this app image container and adding any flags to it essentially provides those to the process type? I definitely see the value for the latter part because I was kind of hoping to dog food, CNBs to produce that pack image that then you could just pass in arguments to that pack image and actually execute it and run it, right? So that seems really, really nice and useful. But I see the other point as well. So I'm not sure, but I do feel like we need to make that decision as which one of those is the primary default or use case.
I do think we've gotten a lot of feedback that people expect the arguments to work and be arguments to their process, like across many different Slacks and lifecycle and pack issues. That's why I lean towards the argument being the default. I think if we wanted a more intuitive experience for some of the other things, we might reconsider having like a pack run or something where we're controlling the experience of running it with our platform. I think when we're talking about just the raw container experience, I feel like given the trade-offs, I personally feel pretty strongly that this is the best we can do, but
yeah.
I guess are people open to the inverse of that, like from Javier's kind of open-ended question, like ours is the esoteric case versus the common case?
Anecdotally, I think ARGS is the default.
Javier's kind of open-ended question, like ours is the esoteric case versus the common case?
Did everybody hear
Yeah, it was kind of hard
Terrence
to hear you,
Ghost?
Terrence, the last
Okay.
time.
The same thing twice? Was
Yeah,
like
twice
okay.
is really weird.
I was
Yeah.
like
I was
breaking
freaking
up. I always assume it's just my internet being weird. I'm glad it's someone else this time.
Well, I think Ben heard me. I guess Ben's the only one.
Oh man, you're gonna have to go and reconnect. Can't hear
Yeah.
you really.
Well, that I could browser Zoom, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder that Ben respond to is args or basically the command the more esoteric? I think that's like kind of an open question. Like,
yeah, I think, yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I kind of actually think that what you're seeing might be specific to the like environment that's created by your build packs. Like we put the proc file build pack in every group, and people very frequently write a proc file, just totally override the command. We've totally had people ask for this. Like it's not, unheard of request, but I think the like the ecosystem that we're building from that people expect is to have run bash work and to sort of favor overriding the command as a whole. So that like all that is to say that like, while I acknowledge that you're seeing it very frequently, is it really the case that it's that's true across all of the Buildpack ecosystem?
And I don't have an answer for that. Like I said, all of my experience would be anecdotal with exactly the self-selection bias that you're describing.
Yeah, I think unfortunately ours is the same but inverse.
Yep, totally. Yeah, I mean, like if we didn't have Procfile Buildpack all over the place and people didn't already have Procfile, it would probably be very different. So
we could try to find a less anecdotal way to answer the question, right? We could pull CMP Slack and pull like Paketo Slack or other places where people interact with Buildpacks could answer the question. I think the reason the args default feels compelling to me is because it is Docker default in a way. Like what you add in the command become arguments to the entry point rather than overriding is fairly normal. But since we're doing a entry point launcher and then a little special process type thing, it becomes less exactly the same. But I do think having all of the options available without some of the drawbacks of potentially error-prone disambiguation, every platform can provide whatever default they want on top of it, right?
I do wonder if there's maybe a third solution that we haven't really dug into, which is very similar to how, you know, Docker itself would work, where it provides you two configuration elements, the entry point or the command, right? And so when you're creating your image, you could specify like, hey, if I want them to be arguments to the thing that I'm going to start up, then I'm going to put it in the entry point. If not, then I put them into the command, right? And so like in this scenario, what I'm thinking is like, is there a way where we could make it so that the developer or whoever's building the application could somehow toggle this functionality to fit their use case for their application? Just, I have no solution, just a thought process.
That is what the override trigger is, right? That allows you basically to toggle that functionality.
But that's at execution time, at runtime, right? I'm saying what it should be at build time, right? Like if somehow in the project toml I could specify do this, right? And then it's set up so that anybody that consumes this Docker image, there are now additional arguments to my process type. Versus if I don't set that, then it becomes the standard, you know, way that it would work for any other Docker image without an entry point.
I feel like what gets complicated about that is different processes and different build packs have sort of might be driving some of the differences in opinion about which way they'd like to accept arguments more than the user up front. Like right now, if you set default process override at build time, you would get a process that only overrode things, but I don't think that's actually what anyone wants either. They want to default process to be a process and then override to be an override.
So we have 7 minutes left, and I was really hoping to get through to the next item on the list. I'm wondering if it would be okay to move on to that one.
Yeah, it seems like we're not going to resolve this right now. Go for it.
Cool. So share my screen. So it has to do with the image pull policy. There's apparently been a lot of conversation about this recently. Let's not allow it for now. And I think it comes from different angles. And so far, I think the reception has been positive, with the exception of the default, right? So this proposal to speak to is more about two things, really. Is kind of allowing for the image pull policy to go from 2 options right now to 3 options, and then changing that default when you don't specify any flag to be that new 3rd option, right? Which is pull it if it doesn't, pull it only if it doesn't exist. And it seems like the point of contention is whether or not that really should be the default. So I don't think anybody has any problems with adding the 3rd option. I think there might be some conversations we could have about whether to use Boolean flags, which maybe now I'm in favor of, versus a parameterized one. But this one I kind of wanted to talk about if we have time, which is what should the default be? And I don't really have a strong opinion, other than I feel like it comes up more frequently than not that the performance itself gets impacted quite significantly, and it's not necessarily something that you would expect to be happening, where it's always updating your image or trying to update your image. So even if you have it locally, for whatever reason, you created some other image that has the same name, and because you're testing with it or whatnot, and then it comes along and you execute the command and it like takes over that image, that's really unexpected. So that there's that, and then obviously the performance aspect of it. So
yeah, that literally happened to me as I was coming onto the call today, as I was trying to use an ad hoc stack sitting on my Docker daemon. It was overwritten as it went and did a git pull for something else. So I don't love that, but my feeling is wherever we possibly can, we should be consistent with the behavior of the other platforms that are around us. Even if we think that we have a better idea or a use case, the reward for being cognitively consistent, that people can come to the products we're trying to build without having to learn an exception to everything else that happens in their life, feels really, really useful to us. It just lowers the barriers to entry. And I think that has a pretty significant value. And so from that perspective, the pull if not exist, or whatever that strategy is called, I think is the correct default here.
I agree
completely
too.
agree.
I do think we should add a warning though, because we're building images meant for production. That's my caveat, is I think that if the image is like, if you did it with no pull, you should put a warning of like how old your base builder is or something like that. Like, I don't know, like I feel like there needs to be something, because you are building production grade images, and I don't know.
Yeah, I just feel like the inverse of that is like, this is why so many things that people build with Docker have base images that are out of date, and you just like, because by default you aren't doing the right thing. I guess like the kind of counterexample for me is like the kind of people that are also interested in this kind of stuff are probably people that are app developers more often than not, and like the kind of state of the art for them, as well as like when I run my like npm install or whatever for like normal build for a language, like it's not like you don't expect it to hit the index. Like it's like you have to explicitly choose to go offline and not do it when I like do a normal build for most language ecosystem things. And if I'm gonna do that, like it doesn't seem crazy to me that like that is also true for doing a normal app build.
Yeah, I think one of the other ways to look at this is that we are talking about Pack, a CLI tool that certainly can be used in CI systems, but traditionally isn't going to be. There are other strategies, whether it's Tecton pipelines or whether it's Kpack or whether it's whatever undergirds Evergreen. Like, they can make a different decision that always requests the latest images for these things in a way that our target audience doesn't expect that when dealing with the CLI.
Yeah, because if you think about from that perspective as a user, right? If you run these commands, you know, almost simultaneously or back to back, you don't want to incur that same cost, which apparently could be pretty significant for the GCR registry. Like you don't want to incur that cost every single time, just because we want to make sure that they're up to date. Like, and maybe we could change our strategy, and that could be an option there too. But I don't think it's worth it, right? Like when in reality, when they're building it, it's more for like their current local development process versus something where they would use Tecton or some, KPAC or some other platform that is actually using and producing these images for production.
While I understand the security concerns, I agree that I prefer to optimize performance and predictability in PAC. I do wonder if we could have a default poll policy option in the PAC config so that someone can set it once to always if they prefer the other end of the trade-off without having to remember to pass it in each command.
Yeah, I like that.
Is that something that we would want in this RFC, or something that we should add once there's that demand for it? Because I would hate to put it in this RFC, develop it, and then nobody actually use it.
To me, because it doesn't conflict with anything in this RFC, and it is a nice PAC convenience, but a fairly small one, I feel like it's the kind of thing that in my mind doesn't even need an RFC. It'd be like once we have poll policy, if PAC wanted to add a default poll policy in the config file, I don't think that needs a vote from everyone.
I concur with that.
So I'm not sure if anybody was swayed by this conversation, but we are at time. But at least hopefully we could continue the conversation either on the thread or tomorrow. Cool.
Have a nice day, everybody.
Thanks.